Hello. Over the next 11 minutes, you're going to learn about an area of personal injury litigation that is enormous and growing daily. Now, make no mistake, what you're about to see could literally revolutionize your practice. It could also put you on the cutting edge of solving one of our nation's most troubling but most hidden social problems. I'm Alan Ackles.
And I'm Belinda Lane. We thank you for joining us. It is no secret that the United States has one of the highest teen pregnancy rates in the industrialized world. However, a common misconception is that this problem is the result of children having sex with children. In reality, and this has been consistently found in study after study, the vast majority of minor girls who get pregnant in America today are impregnated by older men. In fact, some research has put this figure at between 60 and 80%. Perhaps more troubling is that these numbers even apply to girls in the youngest age groups. The data shows that girls between 10 and 15 years old are now more likely to be impregnated by adult males than they are by boys near their own ages.
Several factors created the situation, but the primary one is that mandatory reporting statutes that require healthcare workers to report reasonable suspicions of child sexual abuse to the authorities are being ignored. Ironically, this is occurring at the very facilities that are most likely to have contact with underage sexual assault victims, namely clinics that provide pregnancy tests, treatment for sexually transmitted diseases, contraceptive drugs or devices, and abortions.
When an underage girl seeks one of these services, she is providing clear evidence that she is or has been sexually active. Since she is not legally old enough to give consent for sexual activity, by definition, this evidence constitutes reasonable suspicion of child sexual abuse. But after more than 12 years of research into this issue, Life Dynamics has documented that virtually no mandatory reporting is being done by the clinics that provide these services. In fact, not only are the people at these facilities almost universally ignoring their state's mandatory reporting laws, they often take an active role in circumventing them. If you would like additional information on the Life Dynamics investigation into this issue, you can find it online at childpredators.com.
From a civil litigation standpoint, there are several key points to keep in mind regarding mandatory reporting. First of all, state laws allowing minor girls to secure the services I listed earlier without parental involvement are irrelevant, since the report is not made to the parents but to the state. Moreover, compliance with state mandatory reporting statutes does not prevent, interfere with, or even delay a child's ability to access these services, since they can be rendered prior to the report being filed. Secondly, the responsibility for determining whether the circumstances of a child's sexual activity are criminal or not lies solely with the state. Mandatory reporters are neither required nor authorized to investigate these incidents, and whatever personal conclusions they might reach about them have no bearing on their legal obligations as mandatory reporters.
Third, a mandatory reporter's duties are not affected by anything the girl or those accompanying her might say about the situation. For example, if a 12-year-old girl is brought to an abortion clinic by her mother with both claiming that a classmate got her pregnant, it may be that they are telling the truth. It may also be that they are trying to cover up the fact that the real culprit is the mom's 45-year-old boyfriend. But in either case, that is not for the clinic staff to determine. For a mandated reporter, the only relevant factor is the age of the girl.
Now, a fourth issue is that in most jurisdictions, criminal charges are not brought against a male for having sexual contact with an underage girl if he is also a minor. And even if he is an adult, most states stipulate that he must be more than a specified number of years older than her before charges can be filed. However, the question of whether such exemptions to prosecution apply in a particular case is not up to the healthcare worker to decide. Again, the authority to make that determination belongs only to the state.
The final thing that should be remembered is that investigations into criminal activity always supersede issues involving patient confidentiality, patient privacy, and doctor-patient privilege. This is what allows law enforcement agencies to have access to patient medical records when investigating potentially illegal activity in hospitals, nursing homes, and doctors' offices, or fraudulent billing practices involving Medicare, Medicaid, or private insurance. The fact that this principle applies to clinics where pregnancy tests, STD treatments, birth control, and abortions are provided was confirmed at a 1997 Planned Parenthood convention in Phoenix, Arizona. During a training session at that conference, 2 senior attorneys from the organization's national headquarters advised those who operate Planned Parenthood facilities that their legal obligations under the mandatory reporting statutes override patient confidentiality. In their words, quote, across the board and in every state, unquote.
To appreciate the fundamental principle behind mandatory reporting statutes, just imagine that a man is brought to an emergency room with a gunshot wound. Now, on one hand, it is possible that he accidentally shot himself while cleaning his gun. On the other hand, it is also possible that he was shot while robbing a convenience store. However, regardless of anything the medical staff is told about the situation and regardless of any conclusions they might reach about whether an illegal act has or has not occurred, their only duty is to report. That also applies when a girl who is not legally old enough to consent to sexual activity seeks services that indicate she has been sexually active. As a practical matter, those from whom she seeks those services are in the same position as this emergency room staff. In both cases, the nature of the medical care they are providing is evidence of criminal activity.
It is important to consider the mandatory reporting issue within the context of the pedophile pre-scandal plaguing the Catholic Church, as well as the sexual assaults of children at Penn State University and the emerging revelations about child sexual abuse in the Boy Scouts. The interesting thing is that while there's appropriate concern about the people committing these crimes, the far bigger concern is about the number of people who are aware of these problems and either did not report them or, in some cases, actively concealed them.
And that is precisely what is happening at virtually every clinic in America where pregnancy tests, STD treatments, birth control, and abortions are provided to minor children. It is also true that these facilities have far more contact with underage girls who are being sexually exploited by older men than all of these other organizations combined. Now, another reality is that because these facilities are ignoring their mandatory reporting obligations, they are facilitating the continued abuse of these girls. At Life Dynamics, we studied this issue by analyzing several hundred instances in which men were convicted of sexual crimes against minor girls. In an alarming number of these cases, there was a point at which the victims were taken for birth control, pregnancy tests, STD treatments, and abortions, usually by the perpetrator, with no mandatory reporting made by those who provided the service. In almost every case, the sexual abuse resumed afterward, and many times it would go on for years.
It should also be pointed out that girls who are victims of these crimes often suffer devastating physical and emotional consequences. Research shows that when minor girls who are sexually active with boys near their own ages are compared to those who are involved with older men, those in the latter group are more likely to have multiple sex partners, more likely to engage in dangerous sexual practices, more likely to become estranged from family and friends, more likely to get pregnant, more likely to drop out of school, more likely to run away from home, and more likely to abuse drugs and alcohol. And there are some indications that these girls may be at a higher risk of suicide. In addition, teenage girls now have the highest rate of sexually transmitted diseases in the country, and the majority of them are being infected by adult males. We also know that some of the problems these girls suffer can stay with them for the rest of their lives. When underage girls who are sexually active with older men reach adulthood, they are more likely than their peers to end up on welfare. They have a higher divorce rate. They have an increased risk of being in physically abusive relationships, and prostitution is more prevalent among them than it is within the general female population.
From a litigation standpoint, the issue here is that state laws specifically designed to protect underage girls against sexual predators are being ignored in the very environment where such girls are most likely to be found. You can also be assured that when a worker at one of these clinics is sitting in front of a pregnant teenager, he or she is fully aware that it is far more likely this child was impregnated by an adult than by another child. Yet with almost no exceptions, these people look the other way. And this happens thousands of times every day in clinics all over America.
But you can help bring an end to this tragedy by representing the victims in civil actions against these institutions and individuals. And don't think that the list of potential defendants ends with just the doctors, clinics, owners, clinic directors, and support staff. For example, It is common for teachers and school counselors to provide minor children with referrals to these facilities, and in some cases, school district employees will even arrange transportation and pay for the services rendered at the clinic. We also see these same things being done by friends and relatives of the perpetrators.
Now, as you think about the financial opportunities to be found in this area of litigation, be aware that so far, the best estimates are that the Catholic Church has paid out in excess of $3 billion to resolve the pedophile priest suits with no end in sight. And just remember, the lion's share of the Church's legal exposure is not because of priests having sexual contact with children, but because of other people were aware of the abuse or had suspicions about it, and they failed to report it. But the most important thing for you to keep in mind is that the number of potential plaintiffs created by that scandal is literally dwarfed by the number of potential plaintiffs created by these clinic workers.
The bottom line is, no one is more directly involved in our country's epidemic of child sexual abuse than the people who provide pregnancy tests, birth control, STD treatments, and abortions to underage girls, while ignoring mandatory reporting laws. That is simply a fact. And achieving justice for these victims can not only grow your client base, it can also make your legal practice an instrument for positive change in America. Of course, the wording of the statutes in your state may require you to be innovative and persistent, but if you have talent and if you have a commitment to success, then you can see to it that these young girls and their parents receive the compensation they deserve.
And Life Dynamics is here to help you take advantage of this opportunity. Our groundbreaking research in this area can help you win these cases. And if you decide to advertise for clients, we will show you how to develop a marketing plan. We can even help you design your print ads, your radio spots, and television commercials. And all of our services are available to you at little or no cost. So if you're the kind of attorney who wants to make things happen and you want to take control of your future, give us a call. We're waiting to hear from you. In the meantime, thanks for watching.